Hello and welcome to this new lesson in which we are going to talk about libraries in C. So, in order to create a library in C, first you need to know what is a library. A library is basically a set of functions that do specific actions. And we usually create libraries for sensors, for let's say an LCD display, for keypad, for reading a temperature value, or for simply a calculator. So let's say that we want to create a new library and call it a calculator library. We already mentioned that a library is a set of functions. Now these functions to be used, there are a few things that we need to write. We know that each function has three things: the prototype, the implementation, and the call. Now, in order to create a library, we need to know the number of files that we can include. Basically, you can include unlimited number of files, but we will only concentrate on two types. This is the first file, and let's call it the C or main.c file. Now you can call it calculator. And this is the second file that we need to call. And let's call it calculator.h. This one is called a header file. And this one is called source file. The extension for this file is .c, and for this file is .h. Stands for header. Now, we need to know what are the things that we will write inside each of these files. The header file will include the prototype. This thing. So now we are done with this. The C file will include the implementation. So we are done with this as well. Now the thing that remains is the call. The call is basically something we will do in our main.c file, which is the main program file. Now to do this, or to call these functions inside our main file, we need to include our library. So we'll write the word include, but instead of writing these two signs, we will add the double quotation sign. And the only thing that we need to include is the header file. So we'll add calculator.header. This line will allow us to call any function inside the source file of the calculator library. So if we did this, we wrote this line, this means that we can see any function inside the calculator.c file, which is the file that we created here. So to wrap things up, this is our library. This library has two things. First, a source file .c. Second is a header file .h. Now let's call them calc. Calc stands for calculator. Now the source file, as we mentioned, will include the function's implementation, while the header file will include the function's prototype. Now to call the functions, we need to add the hash include, which is this line, inside our main. If we added this line, it means that we can see and interact with any function inside the calc.c, which is the source file, this file or this file. And this is basically how easy it is to create a function in C. To create a library in C. Now, to make things more clear, we will create the very same thing with the very same name, calculator, library, inside our notepad, and see how things will be executed. So let's do this. Let's go to our C compiler. Now, this is our main file, so we need to do what we do usually, which is include and int main void. Once you do that, we need to save it. I'll create a new file. Let's see the number to make sure that we have the right numbering for all of our files. Okay, we have it at 21. So let's call it 21 C libraries. Now inside it, we need to create the main.c file. This is our first file. Now we need to create another file and name it calc.c. And this is the source file. So source file, here we will write the implementation functions. And we need to create another file, which is the header file, functions prototype. Just like what we mentioned in our explanation. Make sure that it has the same name as the source file, but ends with H instead of C, and click Save. Now, the implementation for our functions, we need to add a function that will sum two numbers, int x, int y, and we need four functions actually. Add, multiplication, division, and subtraction for the calculator. To add two numbers, to multiply them, to divide them, to subtract them. Now, this is the header file where we wrote the function prototype. Copy these prototypes to the source file, paste it here, replace the semicolon with two curly braces. Now we need to start writing our codes as usual. This is nothing new. We are writing the implementation for each of these functions. So int z equals x plus y, printf, sum result equal %d, and we will add z here. Copy the same lines here, here, and here. Now instead of sum, here we need to add multiplication, here we need to add division, and here we need to add subtraction. Now we are done with the functions implementation inside the source file. But in order to use the printf, we need to include the standard library. This is the standard library. Now, we finished the prototype, we finished the implementation, we need to call them. So we need to add another hash include, just like what we mentioned, with two double quotation. Write calc.h. Now, this means that our main function now can see the functions created inside the source file. So let's call them. Let's call the add function and add 5 and 6. Let's add /n here to make sure that they will not be printed on the same line. Okay, go back here. We need to call the add function, the multiplication function, the division function, and the subtraction function. Now, we need to say a quick thing. If you want to include the library that is created by the compiler creators, you can add it between the larger and smaller sites, like that. But if the library that you want to include is created by a user, you must add it between two double quotations, as you can see here. This library was created by us, that's why it's added between double quotations, and this library was created by the compiler, manufacturer, or creators, so it is added between the greater or less equal signs. So as you can see, this is a good piece of information that you must keep in mind. Now let's save and let's try compiling our code. So here we need to write gcc main.c. Now as you can see, here we have few errors. This is because we tried to compile only that first C file. Now write gcc main.c calc.c. As you can see, it compiled without any errors. As we mentioned earlier, in order to compile two C files, we need to make sure that we name the files here. Now let's execute a.exe. Now as you can see, sum result equals 11. Okay, we have a problem in the implementation. So here we have plus, here we have multiplication, asterisk, division, and subtraction. Let's call it again. a.exe, as you can see, 11, 30, 0, minus 1. That's it. Now, as you can see, our code works just fine without any issues, and we just created our first library in C. If you have written everything that I wrote and you created this library, then this is the time that you must clap for yourself, because you just created your very first C library. I'm sure that this is a lot to take in from one go, so you might need to pause the video, go back and watch it again to understand things, and try to repeat it more than once. Then you can go to the implementation and apply the same thing that I did. Let's summarize what we have covered in this lesson. In order to create a C library, we mentioned that you need to create two files. You can create more than two files. It's basically a design approach, but what we will create is a source file and a header file. The source file and header file must have the same name with a different extension. The source file is .c, the header file is .h. Now, these two files are basically the library, and we are creating a calculator library. The source file will include the implementation or functions implementations, while the header file will include the functions prototype. Now the remaining thing is the call. In order to call these functions, we need to include the library name. The library header file is the thing that we must include in the main C file. So write #include and add the header file calculator.h. Now you must add it between two double quotations because this is a library created by a user, not a compiler related library. After including, you can easily call the functions inside your main, because once you include this, it means that you have the prototype for all of these functions, since the header file includes the prototypes, and you can call them easily. And this is what we did here. This is the functions implementation inside the source file. The header file calculator.h includes the prototype, and the call is inside the main. But before calling, we need to make sure that we are using the #include calculator.h, and this is written between two double quotation, not between larger and less than signs. This is a user created library. This is a computer or a compiler related library. That's it for how to create a library in C. Thanks for watching this lesson. This is Ashraf from Educational Engineering Team.